They didn't just cross a line. They moved it, poured concrete over it, and then invited people over to drink wine on top of it like it had always been theirs. And the worst part wasn't the 6 feet of land they took from me. It was how casually they did it, like I wouldn't notice, like I wouldn't matter. I didn't say anything at first, not because I didn't care, but because I was still trying to figure out if I was dealing with arrogance or something worse. I live at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac just outside a mid-sized town, one of those neighborhoods where people wave but don't really talk, where lawns are trimmed but lives stay private. I bought my place about 5 years ago, a modest 3-bedroom with a wide backyard that slopes gently into a thin patch of woods. Nothing fancy, just enough space for my dogs to run and for me to grill on summer evenings with a couple friends and a cheap cooler of beer. It wasn't luxury, but it was mine, every inch of it. Back then, the house behind me sat empty for months, overgrown grass, peeling paint, the kind of place that made you wonder what story ended there. Then one spring, everything changed almost overnight. Trucks started showing up, contractors moving in and out, dumpsters filling and emptying, and within a few weeks, the place was completely transformed. New siding, modern windows, fresh landscaping, and then came the owners, Ethan and Marissa Caldwell. They didn't move in quietly. You could feel them before you really knew them, like their presence had weight to it. Ethan was the kind of guy who wore pressed polos even on weekends, always holding a drink like it was part of his identity. Marissa had that effortless smile that somehow never reached her eyes, the kind that felt practiced, rehearsed. They weren't rude exactly, just the kind of people who assumed things would go their way before anyone else had a say. At first, I kept to myself, gave them a nod when we crossed paths, didn't go out of my way to start anything. I'd seen enough neighbor situations go sideways to know that sometimes the best relationship is no relationship at all. Then one morning, I stepped out into my backyard with my coffee and noticed something that didn't belong. Wooden stakes. 3 of them, planted in a straight line, about 6 feet past where my property line had always been. I just stood there for a minute, staring at them, trying to process what I was seeing. I'd mowed that yard every other weekend for 5 years. I knew exactly where my boundary was, not because I obsessed over it, but because when something is yours, you just know. I walked over, nudged one of the stakes with my foot, and felt something tighten in my chest. It wasn't confusion anymore. It was irritation, the kind that creeps in slow but settles deep. So I pulled them out, one by one, tossed them over the back fence without much ceremony, and went back inside. I figured that would be the end of it. Maybe a misunderstanding, maybe a lazy contractor eyeballing things wrong. I was wrong. That evening, just as the sun was starting to dip, I heard a knock at my front door. I opened it, and there was Ethan, standing there with a bottle of red wine like we were about to have some kind of friendly chat. "Hey there, neighbor," he said, smiling like we'd known each other for years. Thought I'd stop by and clear something up. I leaned against the doorframe, not inviting him in. "Yeah." He held up the bottle slightly, like it was some kind of peace offering. "We're doing a bit of work out back, expanding the patio, and it looks like there was a little confusion about the property line." "A little confusion?" I said, already feeling where this was going. He nodded, still smiling. "That strip behind your yard, it's not really being used, and it lines up better with our layout if we extend into it a bit. We had someone take a look, and it makes sense structurally and aesthetically." I let that sit in the air for a second. "That strip," I said slowly, "is my backyard." His smile didn't disappear, but it shifted just slightly, like a crack in glass. "Well," he said, adjusting his grip on the bottle, "property lines can be tricky. Surveys don't always match up perfectly with what people think." "I know exactly where my line is," I replied, "and it's not where those stakes were." For a moment, neither of us said anything. The evening air felt heavier than it should have. Then he exhaled, that polite mask slipping just enough to reveal something colder underneath. "All right," he said, "we'll look into it properly." And just like that, he turned and walked away, taking the wine with him. I closed the door, stood there for a second, and told myself it was handled, that whatever this was, it wouldn't go any further. 2 weeks later, I left town to visit my sister. Just a quick trip, nothing major. 3 days, maybe 4. When I came back, everything had changed, and not in a subtle way. I pulled into my driveway, unloaded my bag, let the dogs out, and when I stepped into the backyard, I actually stopped mid-step. Because where there used to be open grass, there was now stone. A full patio. Wide, polished, expensive-looking, complete with built-in seating, a stainless steel grill, decorative planters, and about a third of it sitting squarely on my land. For a second, I honestly wondered if I was in the wrong yard, like I'd somehow walked into someone else's property without realizing it. But no, the fence lines were the same, the trees were the same. The only thing that had changed was that someone had decided my backyard belonged to them, and they hadn't even bothered to ask twice. I felt something shift in me right then, not anger exactly. Not yet, more like a quiet realization that this wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This was a decision. And now, I had to make one of my own. I didn't storm over there right away, not because I wasn't furious, but because I've learned that the first thing you say when you're angry is usually the one thing that makes everything worse. So I stood there for a minute, just staring at it, taking in the details, the clean cuts of the stone, the symmetry, the money poured into something that had no right to be there. It wasn't sloppy. It wasn't accidental. This was planned, measured, executed while I was gone, like they needed me out of the way to make it happen. That thought stuck with me more than anything. They waited. I walked back inside, grabbed the folder where I kept my house documents, flipped through until I found the survey from when I bought the place. I spread it out on the kitchen counter, tracing the lines with my finger, confirming what I already knew. My boundary ran straight, clean, undeniable, and their patio crossed it like it didn't exist. That's when the anger finally showed up. Not loud, not explosive, just steady and cold. I headed straight out the back, through my yard, up to their sliding glass door. I didn't knock softly either. I hit it hard enough that it echoed inside. A few seconds later, Marissa opened it. She had a glass of something pink in her hand, looked like rose, and for a split second, she seemed surprised. Then that same practiced smile slid into place. "Oh, hey," she said, like this was a casual drop-in. "Everything okay?" I didn't smile back. "Your patio is 6 feet into my property." She tilted her head slightly, like she was trying to understand a complicated sentence. "I don't think that's right," she said gently. "We had it surveyed." "I have my survey," I replied, holding up the papers. "And it doesn't agree with yours." She took a sip of her drink, unbothered. "Well, then maybe yours is outdated." That did it. Outdated. I repeated. "It's the county record. It's what the property is legally defined as." She shrugged, like we were discussing paint colors. "You should probably talk to Ethan. He handled all of that." "Get him." She didn't move right away, just looked at me for a second longer than necessary, like she was deciding how much respect this situation deserved. Then she turned and called his name. Ethan came out a moment later, wiping his hands on a towel, like he'd just stepped away from something important. "What's going on?" he asked, already sounding annoyed. I didn't waste time. "You built on my property." He glanced past me at the patio, then back at me, completely calm. "We built according to the survey we had done." "Then your survey is wrong." He gave a short laugh, not amused, just dismissive. "Look, we invested a lot into that space. It's not like we just guessed." "I don't care what you invested," I said, feeling my voice tighten. "It's on my land." For a moment, he just stared at me, and I could see it. That shift from polite neighbor to something else entirely, something more transactional. "If you really believe that," he said, "then you should handle it through the proper channels." "Meaning?" "Meaning hire a lawyer," he replied, like he was offering helpful advice. "Because we're not tearing anything down based on a disagreement." A disagreement. That word echoed in my head as I stood there, looking at both of them. The patio behind them, the calm way they carried themselves, like this was already settled. "All right," I said finally, folding the papers. "We'll do it that way." And I walked away before I said something I couldn't take back. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was unsure, but because I kept replaying everything in my head, trying to understand how someone gets to that point, where they just take something that isn't theirs and call it a difference of opinion. The next morning, I called a property attorney. Her name was Lisa Grant, sharp, direct, the kind of person who didn't waste words. I explained everything, sent over my documents, and within a day she called me back. "You're right," she said plainly. "They're over the line. Not by inches either, it's significant." "So what happens now?" I asked. "We file," she said. "But I'll be honest, this won't move fast." "How slow are we talking?" "Months, maybe longer," she replied. "Property disputes tend to drag." I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the backyard through the window, at that patio sitting there like it belonged. And in the meantime, I asked. They'll keep using it, she said, unless you take action on your side. That part stuck with me, because over the next couple weeks, that's exactly what they did. Every Friday night, like clockwork, people would show up. Cars lining the street, music drifting over the fence, laughter spilling into my yard like I was part of the entertainment. I'd let my dogs out and watch from the back door sometimes, watching strangers sit on chairs that were technically on my land, eating, drinking, living like it was theirs. At first, I tried to ignore it. Turn up the TV, keep busy, tell myself the legal system would handle it. But the thing about being patient is that it only works if the other side respects the process. They didn't. One Saturday afternoon, I was out back picking up after the dogs when I heard Marissa's voice from the other side of the patio, talking to a group of her friends. Yeah, the yard just felt small before, she was saying. So we opened it up. It flows so much better now. I froze for a second, not because of what she said, but because of how easily she said it, like the space had always been hers to open up. Something in me snapped, not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet decision clicking into place. I was done waiting. If they wanted to pretend that boundary didn't exist, I'd make it impossible to ignore. That following Monday, I called a fencing company. The guy who came out, his name was Ron, mid-50s, sunburned neck, the kind of contractor who's seen every kind of neighbor dispute you can imagine. I showed him the survey, walked him through the situation. He looked at the patio, then back at me, and let out a low whistle. They really went for it, huh? Yeah, I said. They did. You sure you want to put the fence right on the line? He asked. No buffer, no compromise. I shook my head. Right on the line. He nodded slowly, like he respected the clarity. All right then, he said. We can start this weekend. Saturday morning came, and right on schedule, his crew showed up. Trucks, tools, posts, the whole setup. I stepped out into the yard just as they started marking the line, the same line Ethan had ignored. And then the digging began. It didn't take long before the noise caught their attention. The back door slid open, and Ethan stepped out, confusion written all over his face. What's going on? He called out. I walked over, hands in my pockets. Putting up a fence. Where? I pointed. Property line. He followed my gesture, and I watched it happen in real time. The moment it clicked for him, the realization that the fence wasn't going around the patio. It was going through it. You can't do that, he said quickly, stepping closer. That's going to cut right through. Your patio? I finished for him. Yeah, I know. His face tightened. This is ridiculous. No, I said calmly. What's ridiculous is building on land that isn't yours and expecting no consequences. By then, Marissa had come out too, phone already in her hand. I'm calling the police, she said, like that would change something. Go ahead, I replied. And she did. About 20 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up. The officer stepped out, took in the scene, the workers, the half-installed posts, the patio being split down the middle. He walked over to me first. What's going on here? I handed him my survey. Installing a fence on my property. He looked it over, then glanced at the patio, then at Ethan and Marissa. They're building through our structure, Ethan said, frustration creeping into his voice. This is destruction of property. The officer raised an eyebrow slightly, then looked back at the map in his hands. Sir, he said evenly, according to this, that structure is partially on his property. That's disputed, Ethan shot back. Maybe, the officer said. But until a court says otherwise, he's allowed to fence his land. There was a pause, the kind that feels heavier than it should. Then the officer handed the papers back to me and gave a small nod. Just make sure your contractors stay within the line. Will do, I said. He turned and walked back to his car, leaving the rest of us standing there in the sound of drills and hammers. Ethan didn't say anything else, just stood there, jaw tight, watching as post after post went in, watching his patio get divided into two separate worlds. And for the first time since this started, I felt something shift. Not victory, not yet, but control. By the end of that day, the fence was up, 8 feet tall, clean, solid, running exactly where it always should have been. It didn't curve, didn't compromise, didn't try to be neighborly. It just stood there, straight through the middle of what used to be their open concept patio. On my side, it looked like a boundary. On theirs, it looked like a mistake they could no longer ignore. And the thing about a fence like that is it doesn't just block space, it changes how people behave. That first night, it was quiet. No music, no laughter, no glasses clinking. Just the occasional sound of a chair scraping on stone, then silence again. I sat on my back steps with a beer, dogs stretched out beside me, staring at that wall of wood like it had always been there, like the last few weeks had just been some strange detour. But I wasn't done. Because here's the part nobody tells you about situations like this. Winning on paper doesn't mean anything if the other side still thinks they can wear you down. And Ethan, he struck me as the kind of guy who didn't lose gracefully. He wasn't loud about it, but you could feel it, that quiet confidence that rules would eventually bend his way if he pushed long enough. So I decided not to wait for the next move. I went ahead and made a few of my own. The following week, I installed a gate on my side of the fence, reinforced lock, nothing fancy but solid. Then I put up a bright, unmistakable sign right at eye level. No trespassing. It wasn't aggressive, just clear, the kind of message that leaves no room for interpretation. And then, I did the thing that, to this day, people still ask me about. I got chickens. 3 of them. Rescues from a small farm about 30 minutes out. The woman who ran the place told me their names, and I didn't bother changing them. There was Daisy, loud and restless. Pearl, who liked to wander. And Ruth, who had a habit of announcing everything like it was breaking news. I built them a coop right along the fence line, on my side. Of course, positioned perfectly so that any sound, any smell, any early morning enthusiasm would drift exactly where it needed to go. Now, before anyone jumps to conclusions, everything I did was legal. I checked local ordinances, made sure I stayed within limits. I wasn't trying to break rules. I was just finally using them. And it worked faster than I expected. By the second weekend, their gatherings had changed. Fewer people, shorter nights. By the third, no one came at all. Turns out, there's only so much small talk you can have over the sound of a very opinionated chicken at 6:30 in the morning, especially when your luxury patio now comes with a side of reality you didn't plan for. I didn't celebrate it, not outwardly, but I noticed. And apparently, so did they. About a month after the fence went up, I got served. Ethan was suing me. Harassment, property damage, emotional distress, the whole list. It wasn't surprising, honestly. It felt less like a legal move and more like a statement, like he needed to reassert control somewhere, somehow. So I responded the only way that made sense. I countersued. Property encroachment. Trespassing. Full reimbursement for legal fees. I handed everything over to Lisa, and she handled it like she always did, efficiently, without drama. Let them talk, she told me. We'll stick to facts. And that's exactly what we did. The court date came quicker than I expected. Small courtroom, nothing fancy, just a judge, a few rows of seats, and 2 very different versions of the same story waiting to be heard. Ethan went first. He spoke well. I'll give him that. Confident, structured, painting himself as someone who made an honest investment based on professional guidance, now being unfairly targeted by an uncooperative neighbor. Marissa sat beside him, nodding at the right moments, that same composed expression she always had. Then it was our turn. Lisa didn't raise her voice, didn't try to outshine him. She just laid things out piece by piece. The original county survey, my purchase documents, timeline of events, photos of the construction, and then the part that shifted everything. Their professional survey, or rather, the lack of one. Because when it came time for Ethan to present proof of the survey, he kept referencing what he had wasn't a certified document, wasn't filed, wasn't even signed by anyone licensed. It was measurements, rough ones, taken by a contractor who eyeballed the boundary based on fence alignment and spacing. I watched the judge as that detail landed. Not dramatic, just a slight pause, a small exhale, the kind of reaction that tells you the outcome has already started forming. Mr. Caldwell, the judge said after a moment, leaning back slightly. You built a permanent structure based on an unofficial estimate, on land that was not legally verified as yours. Ethan opened his mouth, probably to reframe it, but the judge raised a hand just enough to stop him. That is not a misunderstanding, he continued. That is a risk you chose to take. The room felt very still after that. The ruling came shortly after. They were ordered to remove every part of the structure that crossed into my property, restore the land to its original condition, and cover my legal expenses in full. No ambiguity, no compromise, just final. A week later, I stood in my backyard with a cup of coffee, watching a crew roll in, not mine this time, but theirs. Jackhammers, trucks, equipment, the same kind of setup that had built that patio now there to erase it. Piece by piece, it came apart. Stone cracked, sections lifted, metal hauled away. What had once looked permanent, expensive, untouchable, turned into rubble in a matter of hours. I didn't say anything. Didn't need to. I just watched. And yeah, there was a part of me that felt something close to satisfaction. Not because they lost money, though from what I heard, it ended up costing them closer to 30 grand once everything was done. But because for the first time since this started, the line was back where it belonged. Clear. Undeniable. Mine. After that, things changed. They kept to themselves more. No more parties. No more casual conversations drifting over the yard. If we crossed paths, it was quick, polite in the way strangers are polite, not neighbors. The fence stayed. The chickens stayed too. In fact, I expanded their space a bit, gave them more room. Turns out, they were better company than I expected. And every now and then, usually early in the morning, I'd hear Ruth start up, loud, unapologetic, announcing the day like she owned it. I'd sit there with my coffee, dogs at my feet, looking out at the yard, my yard, and think about how something as small as 6 feet can tell you a lot about people. About what they think they deserve. About what they're willing to take. And about how far you're willing to go to draw a line and keep it there. Now here's the part one still think about sometimes. Could I have handled it differently? Maybe. Could I have compromised, avoided the fight, found some middle ground? Probably. But then again, if I had, would that line still be mine? I don't know. So I'll ask you this. If someone crossed into your space, not by accident, but by choice, and then acted like it was theirs all along, would you have done the same thing? Or would you have let it go? Let me know what you think, because I've heard both sides, and honestly, I'm still not sure which one people respect more.